Uh, Greetings, everyone. I am Syed Ali Zia Jafri, and I welcome you to another episode of the CISPR webinar series, which aims to bring to you quality discussions on strategic, security, and foreign policy issues. In her lawfare article entitled Learning from Failed Peace Efforts in Afghanistan, Kate Bateman argues that the United States lost many an opportunity to engage with the Taliban. She rightly notes that Washington was fixated on defeating the said group. Yet, 3 years to this date, the Taliban retook Kabul as a much more formidable force than they were after the first 4 weeks of Operation Enduring Freedom. How did this happen? How and why did the Taliban emerge as the rulers of Afghanistan? Have they transformed? How should the international community deal with them? These are some of the questions that need to be addressed. Dr. Hassan Abbas's new research led book, The Return of the Taliban Afghanistan After the Americans Left, delves into all this and a whole lot more. An ace scholar, Dr. Abbas is a distinguished professor of international relations at the Near East South Asia Strategic Studies Center, National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He has previously been associated with various prestigious academic institutions, to include Harvard and Columbia universities. His research interests lie in wide ranging topics, including extremism, terrorism, nuclear weapons, institutional reforms, and Islamic history. Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas, for gracing this our event.
Thank you so much.
You have, as I mentioned in my introduction, authored a very comprehensive book on the transitions that the Taliban have undergone over the past 21 years. Uh, just for our readers' benefit, I want you to walk us through those transitions starting from 2001. Many people believe that this is Taliban 2.0, but you in your book have categorically dubbed this period, which starts from 2018, as Taliban 3.0. So, how do you look at this transition, and what is the difference between these categories, and what accounted for this evolution from a ragtag virulent militia to negotiators that negotiated um, a return into power in a rather emphatic and seamless manner?
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I'm really grateful for the opportunity and great to see you after a while as well. I'll start by arguing that first and foremost, a lot of this is linked to the idea of how various groups, whether militant or even political, are projected through global media and think tanks and other platforms. And at times, we are given a picture which is half cooked or half truth. And this is one case which fits in. We historically projected Taliban, whether in the West or even in the East also, as cavemen, as uneducated, ill-organized, totally rigid, manipulated group who's cut out of touch with reality and cut off from the rest of the world. If anything, it tells us why we need to have more scholarship and field research and based on interviews and interactions whenever we are looking at a group, whether political or religious or even a militant group. After that kind of basic theory part, if I may say, I've indeed argued that this is a group which is Taliban 3.0 for these 2 or 3 major reasons. First and foremost, we know, if I have to say it in 1 minute, how Taliban had started. This was partly a movement, partly consequences of the Afghan jihad of the 1980s. Also, these were those fellows who were trained and educated in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border region through various madrasas. There's a huge debate on whether this was a manufactured militant group or a social movement. I think now we are pretty clear that it was a spontaneous movement, so to say. These were the sons and son-in-laws of the Afghan Mujahideen. They reacted to what Afghanistan had become in the 1980s and 1990s, and they got a timely support from Pakistan at that time as well. That was Taliban 1.0. But if I give one anecdote, this is from Ahmad Rashid's book on Taliban, that Mullah Omar, when he was in Kandahar, his finance ministry was basically a big wooden box under his bed. Whenever someone would come and ask him for any financial support, he would get up from his bed, he will open that box, give him some jewelry or cash. That was how the financial side of things were happening. Some of the cabinet members were also had no background in training. Some were clerics, some were militants. That was Taliban 1.0. Then comes 2001, and that's how the Taliban transition happened into an insurgency, which required a very different kind of framework. Some of them, what we always heard, the Taliban Shura or Quetta Shura, Karachi Shura or Kandahar Shura, wherever it was, and it was in all these places, frankly. This was a group of 25 to 35 people at different times who were doing their strategy making. But that's the time during 2001 to 2018 when there was a military command that established itself within Afghanistan. They were fighting the Afghans, they were fighting the Americans and the coalition forces. It required a very different kind of planning and strategy. So it was completely an insurgent militant group. And then there were other smaller groups. There were some groups which were drug lords. There were others like Haqqani group, which initially was a distinct group. And I'm sure you remember, Ali, there was these books on Haqqani group as well. There were so many people who used to argue, Haqqani group is not Taliban. Haqqani group is a separate group. I am one of those as well who used to think, and I think at that time, for some time, this was accurate. Haqqani group was a huge pressure group, but they allied so closely with Taliban that they brought the whole idea of suicide bombing. In Kabul, we know Siraj Haqqani, today the interior minister, was an important player in this. And then there were outsiders, the Arabs, Central Asians, Islamic movement of Uzbekistan and their foot soldiers played a very important role. The Pakistani Taliban were also involved in supporting this. The point I'm making is that 2001 to 2018 is an insurgent movement which had very different dynamics, very different protocols. Their leadership was on the run, mostly in Quetta and at times other places. People were following them. As I have profiled some of their leaders as well. Mansoor Akhtar, for example, Mullah Mansoor Akhtar, who was ultimately taken out because he was making too many travels to Iran. And so just look at the profile from Mullah Omar, who was not even a cleric. He never went into a seminary, but he was wearing a turban. He was called a mullah. His whole claim to fame was that he had walked in Kandahar into that old museum which has some of the monuments associated with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he went there. There's an old cloak which no one had a chance to even touch. The former kings of Afghanistan would go and try to just touch it, see it for respect, for love, and they would shudder to think they can touch it. Mullah Omar had gone in, taken that out of the box, wore it, went on top of the building. And everyone said, why, if this guy, how this guy has taken the courage to touch this cloak? And by that, his authenticity came. That was one personality profile. The other was one during 2001 to 9 or 10, the time frame when Mansoor Akhtar was there. He made 26 trips to UAE. I have profiled in the book. He was fond of so many things which one would not think are associated with a religious scholar, even militant or whatever kind, but he was a political player. Same with Haqqanis. They had excellent network in UAE and Gulf countries. So the point I'm making, and I close this point by saying that's Taliban 2.0. It had very different dynamics than the original Taliban 1.0, which was a social movement that just got an opportunity to rule Afghanistan in whatever disorganized and ill-organized way. Now comes the Taliban 3. Why I think this is 3.0? Because this is not an insurgent group. This is the group which was able to negotiate with US in Doha from 2018 onwards. But the seeds of this negotiation started in 2012, when first Karzai wanted to negotiate with them. Karzai will actually, in overall history, will come out, I think, in far more important than many people think. Karzai had played a very important role. Karzai, to give credit where due, initially had made the right calls. He wanted Taliban to be involved in the government. He wanted to negotiate with the Taliban, but US and coalition forces totally denied him because US, after the 9/11 tragedy, was in a different mindset. To make my point, the 2012 onwards, there were some small negotiations, and on US request, a Doha office was created. It didn't work out, but some of the families, initially 20 to 30 Taliban leaders, were brought into Doha. Then they brought in their families. Then they brought their broader network. So this took 5-6 years. Those people from Taliban who had moved to Doha, they found a new world in the Gulf countries. The old Taliban, all they knew was Peshawar or Kandahar, maximum Quetta. During the insurgency years, they went around, they knew far more. And then this third generation, the Taliban 3.0, were well trained. Some of them had gone, like the current spokesperson, one of the spokesperson of Taliban government. As soon as he talked, you would know he's either this is Australian accent or New Zealand accent. There are other British trained people. The Taliban 3.0 is the group which has PhDs from Islamic University in Islamabad. This is a far more different group, which none of us, most people had no idea that there is this new face of Taliban that is emerging. They are the one who negotiated. One other anecdote, which will explain, when during 2018 to 20, conversations were taking place and the drafts were being exchanged with each other between United States and the Taliban about this is the draft of the agreement. From the Taliban side, twice or thrice, they made corrections in English language. No one was expecting they would make corrections in a US draft. So this is a different Taliban. Now that they're in the government, this is reflected. The old guard is now reflected by Mullah Hibatullah, who, to give credit where due again, is far more educated than Mullah Umar was, or anyone close to Mullah Umar. Even more than Mullah Baradar, who was the co-founder of Taliban. But Mullah Baradar's religious credentials are also not as strong as this Sheikh al-Hadith Hibatullah. He's very orthodox, very conservative, very problematic, very bigoted also. But having said that, he was running a madrasa for many years in Kuwait, close to Quetta. He is seen as an authentic religious scholar as well. So even the leadership profile of Taliban in 3.0 has changed. Then there are many cabinet members. So this transition is forced by circumstances, is forced by constant development. And this is also was happening, and I close with this, beneath the surface, where everyone was looking at Taliban through this one lens that we forced upon ourselves, that this is a group which is uneducated, cavemen, whereas beneath this, we didn't realize this modern telephone connects you with the world. This brings the world into your hand. And this Taliban 3.0, one other factor, and I promise I'll stop my answer, a long answer after this, 60 to 70% of Taliban foot soldiers today are between 18 to 22 years of age, which means this newer generation of foot soldiers of Taliban were born after Mullah Umar and Taliban were removed from Afghanistan in 2001. They were born even afterwards. They are born in the world where they network through social media. This generation is not aware of the Afghan jihad of the 1980s. These are the ones who are well networked. They operate and think differently. That's why I say this new combination that we are seeing is Taliban 3.0, and we are trying to negotiate and think about the Taliban 1.0 or maximum 2.0. That's why there's this big gap, because we have not fully even realizing even today that we are different, dealing with a different set of people.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive answer. I think a lot of themes, separate themes, could emerge from this longest answer, and I would come to those later. But by reading your book, I realized that you spend a lot of time on looking at the whole Doha process, and to me, you identified three important things that were critical to the success of, so to speak, of the process. One was a change of leadership in the Taliban and the team that they created for the talks. Two was a willingness from both sides to ignore things that could not have been achieved. And three was the mandate that President Trump gave to Dr. Zalmay Khalilzad. I think if you put the three together, you could make sense of how the negotiations proceeded. So again, for the benefit of our readers, it's I would like you to delve a bit into how the negotiations panned out and how they led to the um, how did they pave the way to Taliban's re-entry in Kabul.
Thank you so much. Extremely important point, and I will be brief in response after my initial uh, kind of more of a outline that I laid. These negotiations happened because there was, number one, a political decision at the top level that we need a way out, and from both U.S. side and Afghan side, that means Taliban side. On the US side, I think President Trump was very clear that we are spending too much money. And as we know, he was very careful with the financial side of things because of the US imbalance of payments, so many other things. He was continuously asking, why are we paying so much money into over $1 trillion was spent, but every year US was giving in almost $10 billion to Afghanistan, to the government of Kabul. And his question was legitimate. Why is the whole project not delivering? And frankly, also, US was convinced after quite a while that they will not receive the kind of support from Pakistan that they were expecting. And the reason were Pakistan's national security interests. It took US a while to understand that Pakistan would not compromise on its regional national security interests, because Pakistan was convinced that India is very active in Afghanistan, and Pakistan, because of the Pashtun linkage, had close links with these people. So these were two basic facts. Despite that, we can get into that, what mistakes were committed, and it was problematic from the Western side. But West wanted to change Pakistan's strategy, which was not expected to deliver. That's when President Trump said, okay, if that is the case, if with all our money, and I'm sure you remember some of the strong tweets and statements that were coming out from President Trump at that time. His only good meeting at that time was with the Pakistani former Prime Minister Imran Khan, because they realized they had something in common in terms of their perspective and view about what can work in Afghanistan. Trump, after this realization, gave a go-ahead. This is also a lesson in negotiation. You need top political leadership to buy in. Secondly, you need an interlocutor who you trust. Zalmay Khalilzad, an Afghan American, had been involved with Afghan jihad for a very long time. All of us had seen his pictures sitting next to President Reagan, translating what the Mujahideen were talking to President Reagan. So he was an academic, a PhD, a practitioner, and he had served in Afghanistan as US ambassador, as well as the top interlocutor and advisor to US government on Afghanistan. So many people have criticized him, severely. Even in fact, today you go to Washington D.C., you mention anything about Afghanistan, they start extreme criticism over Zalmi Khalilzad. I've developed some sympathy for him for this reason alone, that the man was given a task. He was very well equipped. His credentials strong. Yes, credibility problematic from different people. There's this one sentence I read somewhere. President Trump was told, Zalmi Khalilzad is a con man. Trump fired back. He said, I need a con man to pull this off. So Zalmi Khalilzad knew well, to give him credit, continuously. And in fact, we hear all his conversations with Mullah Baradar were happening through telephone, WhatsApp. Somebody was saying jokingly in DC these days, they say, the day we'll have access to Zalmi Khalilzad's WhatsApp messages, it will be some new revelations. Because during all the conversations, the day-long conversations, at the end of the day, they would go back to their hotel rooms, a new set of conversations will start between Zalmi Khalilzad and Mullah Baradar over WhatsApp. So language was a factor, trust was a factor. Also, I'll mention US was quite flexible in the arrangements. Initially, of course, Mullah Baradar was not there. US requested, we want Mullah Baradar out of Pakistani jail or prison because he has credibility. He was one of the co-founders. US pushed Pakistan. Pakistan supported or responded. Later on, towards the very end, I'm sure you remember that some of the members of the Haqqani family were involved. Because Pakistan was told, we want your help, we want the right people on the table. And those credible people made a huge difference. And they were constantly shuttling between Doha and Islamabad and Kabul also at times. Kabul less so, but mostly to Islamabad, because they were constantly asking Hibatullah, this is what Americans are asking, how should we go about it? On the Afghanistan or Taliban side as well, I think, to give credit, Hibatullah had given a go-ahead. And he had given a lot of authority to Mullah Baradar. And there were some dissensions, but there was a strong group. Continuously, they were sending in more people. And they kept their cards very close to their heart. Last, I'll end with this. Taliban, despite their excellent relationship with Pakistan, were so careful that they were not sharing any details of negotiations with Pakistan. I asked a top Pakistani official involved in these things, and he confirmed it. And he also said that so much so that Mullah Baradar was not sharing their internal decision making, that we had to have one of our, let's say, spies or one of our dear friends to be in the room who was separately, independently telling us at times what's happening inside, but no official Taliban communication with Pakistan at that time. So it was, in fact, I think there's a need for another book just on negotiations, just for the students of history to understand how conversations with militants happen, because there was a strong grouping in US who were saying, we will not negotiate with terrorists. Whereas this case proved, no, you need to talk to even terrorists or militants or whosoever for the benefit of the people. That's how I put
it. Thank you so much, sir. I think it's like you deal with the military and intelligence officials as a professor, and you also teach negotiations and stuff. And the fact that the American state building or nation building effort, however piecemeal it was, failed for so many years, speaks to how critical it was to negotiate with a real phenomenon. Taliban were a real phenomenon, and no matter how we spin it, we cannot ignore that. Um, be it on the battlefield or on the negotiating table, the Taliban did prove that they were better equipped than their counterparts in Kabul. Uh, we can go into the details, but you have actually spent a lot of pages on looking at how Ashraf Ghani was all at sea. Ashraf Ghani and his acolytes were all at sea. Uh, so this reality unfortunately did not dawn on people inside and outside of the DC Beltway. Um, so moving on to my next question, uh, you talked about the social media generation of the Taliban, and you spend a lot of time in the book talking about the factionalism between various groups within the Taliban. Um, it's quite interesting we look at when we go back to the archives and we look at national intelligence estimates. Like um, we can identify how wrong U.S. national intelligence estimates were, for example, in relation to the Chinese nuclear program and all. And one of the reasons as to why that was the case was that the Americans did not understand the internal political dynamics that were at play in various countries. Uh, so please delve into the current factionalism within the Taliban, and how is that this dichotomy or tiff between the Helmandis and the Kandaharis on one side, and the new people who are, so to speak, can be are led by the Baradar school of thought or the Doha school of thought. So, because I think this is important, because Taliban are now governing a country, or they're trying to govern a country. So, how would that feed into it? Especially also because you have a background in institutional reforms and governance mechanisms as well.
Thank you so much. Excellent points you have raised. I'll very briefly mention one thing on the previous Afghan Republic, as much as it is linked to the factionalism today. No doubt about it, it was the corruption and poor governance which led to the fall of Ashraf Ghani government. And one factor to keep in view is rightly so that there was this strong support uh, within the rural areas of Afghanistan, especially, which was reacting to the outside powers. And I think there were few experts who really read some of the old works on Afghanistan. If anything brings everyone together in Afghanistan, that is outside influence or any intervention from outside, whether it was Soviet, or in this case American, or even Pakistani. We are seeing the strong negative reaction to that. However, a lot of infrastructure was built at that time, and that is now something that is being utilized by the new Taliban. So Taliban 3.0 is also greatly benefiting from the infrastructure, banking system, for example. I had mentioned the Mullah Omar Ministry of Finance. Today, there is a functioning state bank. World Bank has appreciated the revenue generation. It's not because Taliban have good individuals. It's because good means they have strong individuals who are professional. It is because, by my count, about 40% of the current bureaucracy in Afghanistan, this is my estimate based on anecdotal conversation, anecdotal evidence, that 40% of the current bureaucracy of Taliban is the one that was trained during Ashraf Ghani and Karzai years by the US and coalition forces. So the contribution that West made in terms of modernizing and developing the infrastructure is there. So that is not taken away. That money is not lost in that sense. Also, some of the young women and men also who are making a case for change, still protesting in Afghanistan, are also a product of the education system that the Western countries built. So I would not totally negate that or totally declare that as a total failure. Ultimately, 15, 10 years down the line, you may see a lot of credit that will be given to the Western effort that built the new Afghanistan. That one point I wanted to mention. Yes, Ashraf Ghani and his cabinet members, because of their corruption and because of their incompetence and because of the factionalism they had, the ethnic reasons, the internal rivalries, that led to their fall. The new Taliban are now divided by and large, I would argue, into four major groups. And this, some of this is has come out. Sorry for a pitch to my book, but the paperback of the book has just come out. Actually, it will be released in US in 3-4 days, where I have added a new epilogue and explained some of this factionalism. So one is this old guard now in Kandahar. Mullah Hibatullah explained he's a cleric, but he has expended his power. About a year ago, people were in doubt whether Mullah Hibatullah will survive, because he was seen as a cleric, because the real uh, personality who was pitched as the new Taliban was Mullah Baradar, because Mullah Baradar was leading the negotiations with Taliban, with the US representing Taliban. But Mullah Baradar also somebody who had spent a lot of time in jail, and he clearly, everyone that I've talked to who previously talked to him say he's a changed man, because he had gone through this thinking and rethinking, that by just for supporting Bin Laden, he never said it publicly because that would be catastrophic for him politically. But in closed doors, he is seemed to be of the view that by giving a chance to Bin Laden and by defending Bin Laden, we destroyed our whole Taliban movement and control of Afghanistan back in 2001. So he's one of those who has gone through this rethinking. So, and because of his moderate roots as well and his credential as one of the co-founders of Taliban movement, he was supposedly the person who will take charge of everything. However, that was not to be. One reason Pakistan continued to have a lot of influence, and Pakistan never liked him. Pakistan mishandled him as well. But Hibatullah also is is not in anyone's pocket. I mean, I have heard from so many Afghan experts who even to this day challenge, and they ask me, "Have you met him?" I said, "No, I have not met him." "How do you know he exists?" I said, "So who do you think is running Afghanistan?" And they would say, "Oh no, there's an ISI colonel who's sitting in Kandahar and who's acting as Hibatullah." Totally wrong, and absolutely inaccurate, unless you have something to prove. No, Hibatullah exists. Hibatullah has developed a core group of clerics who advise him. His support base is middle ranking clerics who are all over the south and east of Afghanistan. They are his support base, the ideological linkage of Taliban. He has now he hired a Soviet trained Afghan colonel who has built him a new security force, because Hibatullah knows that many of the Afghan forces, Taliban forces, police, they're all in Kabul. All his cabinet and prime minister and 3 deputy prime ministers sit in Kabul. He has developed, some people think he was advised by the Iranians to build something on the pattern of IRCG. I don't know. We are hearing this. In fact, we can't verify it. What we do know is he has built a very strong force. Some say 20,000, some say 40,000. I think it's probably less than that. But he has his own force from his tribe. People forget Hibatullah is from a Ishaq tribe, which is far more important than Mullah Omar's tribe. So Hibatullah is a strong tribal network also. He's employing them to be part of that new security force. So he has expanded his network. He has his own worldview. He's not someone who wants recognition of Taliban. Now I'll move to the cabinet briefly. They are pragmatists who are ruling. Mullah Omar's son, Mullah Yaqub, recently he was giving a big lecture in a big hall, making actually a lot of sense about the new Afghanistan. Sirajuddin Haqqani, keeping aside his profile as a terrorist, which is also true, but keep that aside, he's a pragmatist. He recently went to Saudi Arabia, engaged with the Saudi leadership. He previously went to UAE, met MBS, so he has met both the top leaders in these countries, engaged with them. According to my sources, he has asked for capacity building. He reached out even to, let me put it carefully, to some Western countries, asking for training for Taliban customs officials. So he gets it, what they need to do. Revenue generation from border areas is improved. Then there are other cabinet ministers. I mentioned to people there are 2 Hazara who are there, the Shia Muslims who are in the cabinet. There are no women. That's where the weak points start coming in. But Kabul is more bureaucratic, it's more political. They are reaching out, they're building new narratives, and they're benefiting from the infrastructure that US left. Whereas Kandahar is the heartland. These There was a lot more internal fighting or rivalry, I should say, or competition. It About 2 years ago and 1 year ago. Today, Hibatullah comes out as a victor. There are still challenges. In one case, just one anecdote, and I'll stop. Hibatullah was, whenever questioned uh, lately about some of his policies on, for instance, girls not going to school. And I've heard from many people, and I have credible sources to say a significant number of Taliban, in majority of among the Taliban, they believe that girls should go to school. But Hibatullah is the one who's continuously vetoing it. And so whenever somebody would go to Mullah Hibatullah and say, this is wrong, this is how it is to be done differently, it was his routine thing to say, okay, I give over, you guys take over. I'm not going to be Amirul Mominin anymore. So there was a group of people who decided they'll go. And as soon as Hibatullah in routine, out of his modesty or whatever humbleness, will say, okay, if you have so much criticism, I'm not going to be the leader. And they said, as soon as he'll say this, we'll say, okay, we are ready. We'll have other Majlis Shura people. We'll say, thank you very much, Hibatullah Sahib. We will make somebody else the leader. Hibatullah got a cue about it because he has built an extensive network of his agents within different ministries. He's constantly getting feedback. So he knew. So this team came in, and this is one of the people who were involved in that who shared this with me. They went to see Hibatullah, and Hibatullah said, okay, I'm not going to meet the group. He kept them waiting for almost one day and then said, I'm going to meet everyone individually. That's how he was able to take care of this coup that was in the making. The point is, Taliban governance system is somewhat improving. They have many new projects, which we can briefly talk about. Their biggest success is their regional policy. But this is all happening because factionalism is decreasing. 6 months ago, if you had asked me, or 1 year ago, the chances that somebody can go and kill somebody internally were high. But now it is less because Taliban know that keeping their context and differences in view, the only way they will survive is if they are united. And they are very clear.
Thank you very much for a very insightful answer. I just have a couple of things to say on this. I think you talked about Pakistan's influence or lack thereof. Uh, f- to tell our readers, I think two books written by Pakistani authors are very instructive in this regard. One is a very famous book that uh, Kamal Matinuddin, the late Kamal Matinuddin wrote. It was entitled "The Taliban Phenomenon." I think that's a very useful book for people to read. It was written in 1998, but it's a very important read. And the second one is written by Ambassador Riaz Muhammad Khan, Afghanistan and Pakistan, Extremism and Resistance to Modernity. Both these books really give a very accurate account of Pakistan's net influence over the Taliban. And there's a very interesting anecdote in your book in which um, the Pakistani football team went to play in Afghanistan in '98, and what happened to the to that team is detailed in your book. They were it was sent back and humiliated, and now you explicitly mention in your book that the position of the chairman of the cricket board was the most sought after. So this is a change, however insignificant, that we need to look at. Um, there was no way Taliban 1.0 could have allowed Afghan people to play cricket. Now, Taliban 3.0 were glued to their television sets to watch the semi-final between South Africa and Afghanistan in the recently concluded uh, T20 World Cup. So this is a change, and as you rightly and repeatedly say in your book, that you're talking about engagement, and it should not be conflated with endorsement. Those are two different things. And people who think that the Taliban can be can be their behavior can be changed without engagement, I think that's not happening. That's not a fair assessment. You Disengagement is not the way forward. We have fought, the West has fought the Taliban for over 20 years, and the disastrous results are in front of all of us. And a repeat telecast should not and must not happen. I'll just plug in two last questions.
Yes.
So one is the terrorism profile. Uh, ISKP is a major threat to the Taliban and to the border areas and beyond on the in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Do the Taliban have the capacity to deal with this threat? And what should be the ideal regional approach to deal with the threat? Because ISKP is a threat not only to Afghanistan but also to Pakistan, to Iran, and Russia, and of course China. We will talk about China and the diplomacy part in the next question.
Thank you so much. A couple of points borrowing from your excellent analysis about the books, and two names that immediately come to my mind in terms of the changes that are happening. One is Fatima Gilani and Mehbooba Siraj, two amazing, uh, courageous, bold women who are both regularly going to Afghanistan today. Um, uh, One other friend mentioned to me that there is this rekindling of or restarting of some of the Sufi circles. And when one person mentioned to me, I said, "Are you sure? Sufis, the mystic groups, which had strong roots in Afghanistan historically. Even among the Taliban, there is one group from Deobandi Naqshbandiya Silsila, which respects mystics, scholars a great deal. I was told, yes, Taliban are sending their representatives sitting in those Sufi circles, but they're allowing it. Some of the Sufi shrines, there's a famous Sufi and Shia shrine in Kabul. In fact, in my book, I have a picture of that is being guarded by, I know this might not be visible, but it might be. It is the shrine is being guarded by the Taliban leaders. I might be able to later on, if there's a time, I would like to show a few pictures. I'll share my screen, and if I might be able to show some. The point I'm making is that Taliban 3.0 is different in many ways than we think. Even I was told, and I've narrated a whole story of a renowned Shia family who visited Taliban. They were taken to various different areas, and he mentioned that during Ashura and Muharram, they were all black flags. Taliban had some restrictions, but by and large, Taliban had allowed some of the practices that various Muslim groups do. So this is not that rigid, bigoted Taliban that we know of. Because of, coming to your answer to directly to your question, ISK in some ways is the new Taliban. Islamic State of Khorasan is the hardline extremist group which believes in transnational connectivity, extremism, and militancy. And Taliban are on the defense. So that's why Taliban are now acting a bit more diverse as well, because their survival is linked to their unity and somewhat being more diverse and inclusive. To not the extent that we use these words in the West or even in some parts of the East, but it is because ISKP is now the newest and extremist threat. I think Afghanistan, and especially Taliban, are not really equipped to deal with ISKP to an extent that they can really eliminate them. They are scared, they are concerned. For instance, Taliban have strongly gone after all the Ahl Hadith or what they call Salafi Wahhabi centers because they think that's the ISKP support. They are now investing more in building a new chain of Deobandi madrasas, which is just because they want ideological support base. And their law enforcement forces yesterday on or today perhaps on their anniversary, they had a big military parade. It's worth watching. They had helicopters. Many people were saying they cannot fly helicopters. The 6 or 7 of those were visible in that parade, and all the military equipment. So they have those resources, but in terms of intelligence sharing, the high-tech signal intelligence and those kind of things, and especially if ISKP folks are coming in from different areas in the region, then that will be a big challenge. I think they want to also not acknowledge this because that will show their weakness. And Taliban, I think, are not allowing any international terrorist group to operate. However, groups like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, that's a different deal because they had helped Afghan Taliban in a big way. And the scare is that if we will go after TTP and hand them over back to Pakistan, they will start joining ISKP. That's the biggest threat they have. The groups that were previously using Afghanistan as a sanctuary are now being linked to different factions within the Taliban. So each faction is responsible that the international group or some of the foreign fighters who are there will not cross the red line. So it is different than a free for all sanctuary for extremists in comparison to the situation that different Taliban factions are made responsible. You will deal with IMAU, you will deal with Al-Qaeda, and ensure that according to our to live up to our deal with the US, the peace deal, they will not cross the line. That's why there's some challenge. I think this is a problematic situation still because TTP is wreaking havoc in Pakistan's tribal areas. And this is another lesson. Everyone thought Taliban are in Pakistan's pocket. No, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, despite Pakistan's threats and everything that Pakistan could do, they have done, including the controversial policy of sending back Afghan refugees. Nothing has worked because Taliban don't work well under pressure, especially from their neighbors. And that's a lesson that needs to be learned.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely, I think Pakistan's security is and should be non-negotiable, of course, and we have to draw some red lines. One of them being the sanctity and the sacred sanctity of our actually recognized the AFPAC international border. So there is no dispute over it. The Afghans do make a deal of it, but even the world recognizes that there is no dispute over it. That is one of the red lines, and the other is Afghan soil cannot be used for to provide safe havens for inimical forces that wreak havoc in Pakistan. And I think one could have a separate conversation on how Pakistan should deal with this Taliban 3.0 because it's very important. As you said, the TTP ever since reuniting with certain other groups has really staged a great comeback in the heartland, in both the hinterlands and the heartland of Pakistan, unfortunately. So I have one question, and then I would like for you to share some words of hope for young Afghans. So my question relates to the international diplomacy bit. China has been very careful in cultivating relations with the Taliban since 2011 or 12 because it feels stability in Afghanistan is instrumental in stabilizing its western part, the Xinjiang province. and obviously the Wakhan corridor. That um, we we want to increase our influence in Central Asia. So for that, a peaceful Afghanistan is very important. Iran has recently become a full member of the SCO. So for Iran too, Afghanistan is very important. Same goes for Russia. So this means that that there is a commonality of interests between all these countries when it comes to Afghanistan. So what should an ideal regional approach towards the Taliban look like?
Excellent question. The ideal approach towards Taliban from the region can be that the regional countries should have a coherent policy and they have a joint policy. I am convinced the day UAE, Qatar, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, China, even leave out China, Russia, even just the immediate neighbors I've mentioned and Central Asian countries, the day they can walk to Hibatullah or even in Kabul and say, we will stop all trade and all interaction with you unless girls start going to school. They will accept it. The current reality is very tragic. Each of these neighboring countries are pushing their own economic agendas. There's a fight about a contract for the Kabul airport between Qatar and UAE. Something has been resolved. Turkey also. Actually, I should have mentioned. Turkey is also playing a very important role. The largest embassy, so to say, in Kabul today is by Iran. Many people thought Shia Iran and Deobandi Taliban Afghanistan will never work together. They are working quite well, very interestingly, even though there are water disputes. But so far, the hopeful sign is that despite these challenges, despite lack of coherence in the regional policy of the neighboring countries, and despite some of the scare that Taliban have created in the region, by and large, economic activity has improved between Pakistan and Afghanistan, for example, between Central Asia and Afghanistan. Taliban are getting free electricity from Uzbekistan. The new roads and railway networks are being built with Iran, for example, and this is happening despite a major water crisis. Taliban are digging a canal, borrowing from water from Amu Darya, which is 100-mile long, 115 miles long, and I might be mixing up miles with kilometers, but 115 let's say, kilometers long, about, I think, significant depth in terms of meters, I think almost 50 or 60-meter long, deep, if not more. It's a huge reservoir of water, but this will take water from the resources of Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. But they have not started a war with Afghanistan on this issue. They are still engaging with them, still giving them electricity till the point that Taliban can pay for that. Pakistan, Afghanistan coal business has really boomed also. The point I'm making is there's a lot of regional trade that is taking place, but there is no coherent regional policy. The countries will have to help Afghanistan also in their projects, then they'll have more leverage on the human rights issues as well. I must mention the biggest challenge that Afghanistan faces today, almost equal in impact to ISK, is environmental crisis. There's so much less focus on this. The lack of water and the humanitarian and leading to humanitarian crisis is a big issue. I'm sure many of us saw, your audience saw the floods in parts of Afghanistan. Earthquakes also happen. There is a huge environmental challenge faced by Afghanistan today, but it's not in the limelight. So that's how I will pitch the regional context. China has a lot of leeway. China's foreign minister met Baradar and others as well. Mullah Baradar, by the way, is regaining some of his lost power in a sense that he's been made in charge of all the economic policies. And so all the economic ministries, they report to Mullah Baradar. Very smart strategy on the part of Taliban. But a regional cohesive policy is something which is really missing in all of that. And then I can talk about some of the young people, but maybe I'll link this with your last question.
Thank you so much. This was quite incisive. So, as you know, that in 2019, the government of Pakistan reached out to my director, Dr. Rabia, to asking her if she could accommodate a group of Afghan students in her department. And at that time, there was a lot of tiff between at the people to people level, where a lot of vitriolic statements were coming from both sides. Let's be frank. And she said this is perhaps the best time to bring these people to Pakistan. And since 2019, we have hosted three batches of Afghan students, out of which one batch has graduated, and the alumni are going places all around the world. Those bright young Afghan students, uh, which total 120, they have seen war, violence, mayhem, and ruckus all their lives, but they are the ones that are brimming with confidence, with hope, and they are the carriers of Afghanistan's future, and they deserve much better than what they than the lives that they've lived before. So, what is your message of hope for those 120 students that I had the pleasure of teaching for a good 5 years, and for the strong, vibrant, and resilient people of Afghanistan about the future?
Thank you for this excellent question. And I really wanted to say something about it because I remember seeing the images and pictures from Professor Rabia and the university when those pictures and those discussions were taking place. And that is indeed something that needs to be duplicated. There needs to be more investment in this. I recently heard a good news that Pakistan has added some scholarships for Afghans, both men and women. That's a great news in itself, and the Afghan government, the Taliban government, have agreed to it. Look, my message to this group is the future of Afghanistan will be in your hands. There's simply no doubt that the way the transitions are taking place, we need to give each group a chance to transform and transition. And these transitions have been taking place. Taliban also have been trying to adapt and adopt. I think there's tremendous pressure on them to be more inclusive. And there's internal pressure from among the Taliban. And that's the best way. It is the people who come from Afghanistan who will be able to go back and make this case far more effectively. Taliban's Afghanistan may seem to be a bit presenting a dark picture when it comes to Hazaras, when it comes to humanitarian issues, when it comes to women and children, when it comes to some of the people from the previous governments who are facing a lot of oppression. So these are all facts. I'm, through my interview in this conversation, not trying to give the impression that all is well. There are many severe challenges. However, the Afghan history is so rich with so many cases where where Afghanistan resurrected itself. And the history of Sufism, for example, or mystical traditions and inclusivity, the whole region benefit from there. Whether it is Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi or this is other mystical centers, Afghanistan was the hub and center of those activities. Babur Nama, if anyone will pick up, when King Babur, who built the Mughal Empire, he came, he was asked, what do you miss about Farghana Valley and Afghanistan, where your base was? He used to say, I am missing my gardens and libraries. Kabul was known for its libraries hundreds of years ago. So I see still the capacity of Afghanistan to be a bridge building nation between Central and South Asia. The day Afghanistan is stable and vibrant, the whole of South and Central Asia and this part of Asia will benefit to a great level. That's why the case for engagement with Taliban and with others and forcing Taliban to be inclusive, I think it is the Afghans, young people who are getting educated, who hold the key to this transformation. And I wish them best of luck and tons of praise for their success.
Thank you so much for this optimistic message. And absolutely, as you write in your book, that the land of mystics and Sufis and poets, should not have descended into chaos like it did. We have ended this conversation on a very uh, bright and positive note. I am really delighted that you joined and had this excellent conversation. I think books like yours are an important addition to the scholarship on the Taliban. Uh, Realities can't be ignored, and in order for us to bring in lasting peace to the region, it's important that constructive, consistent, and sincere engagements are done with the Taliban, because we have to create win-win scenarios. We need to avoid wars and conflicts and uh, tread towards peace and the pathways to peace. Thank you very much once again. That's
Thank you.
it for today, and we will be back with another episode of the CISPR webinar series. Until then, take care and goodbye.